The Reluctant Dragon by Kenneth Grahame. Part 1. Long ago, might have been hundreds of years ago, in a cottage halfway between this village and yonder shoulder of the downs up there, a shepherd lived with his wife and their little son. Now the shepherd spent his days, and at certain times of the year his nights too, up on the wide ocean bosom of the downs, with only the sun and the stars and the sheep for company, and the friendly chattering world of men and women far out of sight and hearing. But his little son, when he wasn't helping his father, and often when he was as well, spent much of his time buried in big volumes that he borrowed from the affable gentry and interested patrons of the country round about. And his parents were very fond of him, and rather proud of him too, though they didn't let on in his hearing, so he was left to go his own way and read as much as he liked, and instead of frequently getting a cuff on the side of the head, as might very well have happened to him, he was treated more or less as an equal by his parents, who sensibly thought it a very fair division of labor that they should supply the practical knowledge and he the book learning. They knew that book learning often came in useful at a pinch, in spite of what their neighbors said. What the boy chiefly dabbled in was natural history and fairy tales, and he just took them as they came, in a sandwichy sort of way, without making any distinctions, and really his course of reading strikes one as rather sensible. One evening the shepherd, who for some nights past had been disturbed and preoccupied and off his usual mental balance, came home all of a tremble, and sitting down at the table where his wife and son were peacefully employed, she with her seam, he in following out the adventures of the giant with no heart in his body, exclaimed with much agitation, "It's all up with me, Maria. Never no more can I go up on them there downs, was it ever so?" "Now don't you take on like that," said his wife, who was a very sensible woman. "But tell us all about it first. Whatever it is has given you this shake-up, and then me and you and the son here, between us, we ought to be able to get to the bottom of it." "It began some nights ago," said the shepherd. "You know that cave up there. I never liked it somehow, and the sheep never liked it neither. And when sheep don't like a thing, there's generally some reason for it. Well, for some time past, there's been faint noises coming from that cave, noises like heavy sighings with grunts mixed up in them, and sometimes snoring, far away down real snoring, yet somehow not honest snoring, like you and me o' nights, you know." "I know," remarked the boy quietly. "Of course I was terrible frightened," the shepherd went on. "Yet somehow I couldn't keep away. So this very evening, before I come down, I took a cast round by the cave quietly, and there, oh Lord, there I saw him at last, as plain as I see you." "Saw who?" said his wife, beginning to share in her husband's nervous terror. "Why, him, I'm a-telling you," said the shepherd. "He was sticking halfway out of the cave, and seemed to be enjoying the cool of the evening in a poetical sort of way. He was as big as 4 cart horses, and all covered with shiny scales, deep blue scales at the top of him, shading off to a tender sort of green below. As he breathed, there was that sort of flicker over his nostrils that you see over our chalk roads on a baking, windless day in summer. He had his chin on his paws, and I should say he was meditating about things. Oh, yes, a peaceable sort of beast enough, and not ramping or carrying on or doing anything but what was quite right and proper. I admit all that, and yet what am I to do? Scales, you know, and claws, and a tail for certain, though I didn't see that end of him. I ain't used to 'em, and I don't hold with 'em, and that's a fact." The boy, who had apparently been absorbed in his book during his father's recital, now closed the volume, yawned, clasped his hands behind his head, and said sleepily, "It's all right, father. Don't you worry. It's only a dragon." "Only a dragon?" cried his father. "What do you mean, sitting there, you and your dragons? Only a dragon, indeed. And what do you know about it?" "'Cause it is, and 'cause I do know," replied the boy quietly. "Look here, father. You know we've each of us got our line. You know about sheep and weather and things. I know about dragons. I always said, that that cave up there was a dragon cave. I always said it must have belonged to a dragon sometime and ought to have belonged to a dragon now, if rules count for anything. Well, now you tell me it has got a dragon, and so that's all right. I'm not half as much surprised as when you told me it hadn't got a dragon. Rules always come right if you wait quietly. Now, please just leave this all to me, and I'll stroll up tomorrow morning. No, in the morning I can't. I've got a whole heap of things to do. Well, perhaps in the evening, if I'm quite free, I'll go up and have a talk to him, and you'll find it'll be all right. Only please, don't you go worrying round there without me. You don't understand 'em a bit, and they're very sensitive. "He's quite right, father," said the sensible mother. "As he says, dragons is his line and not ours. He's wonderful knowing about book beasts, as everyone allows. And to tell the truth, I'm not half happy in my own mind, thinking of that poor animal lying alone up there, without a bit of hot supper, or anyone to change the news with. And maybe we'll be able to do something for him. And if he ain't quite respectable, our boy'll find it out quick enough. He's got a pleasant sort of way with him that makes everybody tell him everything." Next day, after he'd had his tea, the boy strolled up the chalky track that led to the summit of the downs, and there, sure enough, he found the dragon, stretched lazily on the sward in front of his cave. The view from that point was a magnificent one. To the right and the left, the bare and willowy leagues of downs. In front, the vale with its clustered homesteads, its threads of white roads running through orchards and well-tilled acreage, and far away, and of gray old cities on the horizon. A cool breeze played over the surface of the grass, and the silver shoulder of a large moon was showing above distant junipers. No wonder the dragon seemed in a peaceful and contented mood. Indeed, as the boy approached, he could hear the beast purring with a happy regularity. "Well, we live and learn," he said to himself. "None of my books ever told me that dragons purred." "Hello, dragon," said the boy quietly when he had got up to him. The dragon, on hearing the approaching footsteps, made the beginning of a courteous effort to rise, but when he saw it was a boy, he set his eyebrows severely. "Now don't you hit me," he said, "or bung stones, or squirt water, or anything. I won't have it, I tell you." "Not going to hit you," said the boy, wearily, dropping on the grass beside the beast. "And don't, for goodness sake, keep on saying don't. I hear so much of it, and it's monotonous, and makes me tired. I've simply looked in to ask how you were, and all that sort of thing. But if I'm in the way, I can easily clear out. I've lots of friends, and no one can say I'm in the habit of shoving myself in where I'm not wanted." "No, no, don't go off in a huff," said the dragon hastily. "Fact is, I'm as happy up here as the day is long, never without an occupation, dear fellow, never without an occupation. And yet, between ourselves, it is a trifle dull at times." The boy bit off a stalk of grass and chewed it. "Going to make a long stay here?" he asked politely. "Can't hardly say at present," replied the dragon. "It seems a nice place enough, but I've only been here a short time, and one must look about and reflect and consider before settling down. It's rather a serious thing, settling down. Besides, now I'm going to tell you something. You'd never guess it if you tried ever so. Fact is, I'm such a confoundedly lazy beggar." "You surprise me," said the boy civilly. "It's the sad truth," the dragon went on, settling down between his paws and evidently delighted to have found a listener at last. "And I fancy that's really how I came to be here. You see, all the other fellows were so active and earnest and all that sort of thing, always rampaging and skirmishing and scouring the desert sands and pacing the margin of the sea and chasing knights all over the place and devouring damsels and going on generally, whereas I liked to get my meals regular, and then to prop my back against a bit of rock and snooze a bit, and wake up and think of things going on and how they kept going on just the same, you know. So when it happened, I got fairly caught. When what happened, please? Asked the boy. That's just what I don't precisely know, said the dragon. I suppose the earth sneezed or shook itself, or the bottom dropped out of something. Anyhow, there was a shake and a roar and a general stramish, and I found myself miles away, underground and wedged in as tight as tight. Well, thank goodness my wants are few, and at any rate I had peace and quietness, and wasn't always being asked to come along and do something. And I've got such an active mind, always occupied, I assure you. But time went on, and there was a certain sameness about the life, and at last I began to think it would be fun to work my way upstairs and see what you other fellows were doing. So I scratched and burrowed and worked this way and that way, and at last I came out through this cave here. And I like the country, and the view, and the people, what I've seen of 'em, and on the whole I feel inclined to settle down here. What's your mind always occupied about? Asked the boy. That's what I want to know. The dragon colored slightly and looked away. Presently he said bashfully, Did you ever, just for fun, try to make up poetry? Verses, you know. Of course I have, said the boy. Heaps of it. And some of it's quite good, I feel sure, only there's no one here cares about it. Mother's very kind and all that, when I read it to her, and so's father, for that matter. But somehow they don't seem to— Exactly, cried the dragon. My own case exactly. They don't seem to, and you can't argue with them about it. Now you've got culture, you have. I could tell it on you at once. And I should just like your candid opinion about some little things I threw off lightly when I was down there. I'm awfully pleased to have met you, and I'm hoping the other neighbors will be equally agreeable. There was a very nice old gentleman up here only last night, but he didn't seem to want to intrude. That was my father, said the boy, and he's a nice old gentleman, and I'll introduce you some day if you like. Can't you two come up here and dine or something tomorrow? Asked the dragon, eagerly. Only, of course, if you've got nothing better to do, he added politely. Thanks awfully, said the boy, but we don't go out anywhere without my mother, and to tell you the truth, I'm afraid she mightn't quite approve of you. You see, there's no getting over the hard fact that you're a dragon, is there? And when you talk of settling down, and the neighbors and so on, I can't help feeling that you don't quite realize your position. You're an enemy of the human race, you see. Haven't got an enemy in the whole world, said the dragon cheerfully. Too lazy to make 'em to begin with, and if I do read other fellows my poetry, I'm always ready to listen to theirs. Oh dear, cried the boy, I wish you'd try and grasp the situation properly. When the other people find you out, they'll come after you with spears and swords and all sorts of things. You'll have to be exterminated, according to their way of looking at it. You're a scourge and a pest and a baneful monster. Not a word of truth in it, said the dragon, wagging his head solemnly. Character'll bear the strictest investigation. And now there's a little sonnet thing I was working on when you appeared on the scene. Oh, if you won't be sensible, cried the boy, getting up. I'm going off home. No, I can't stop for sonnets. My mother's sitting up. I'll look you up tomorrow, sometime or other, and do for goodness sake try and realize that you're a pestilential scourge, or you'll find yourself in a most awful fix. Good night. The boy found it an easy matter to set the mind of his parents at ease about his new friend. They had always left that branch to him, and they took his word without a murmur. The shepherd was formally introduced, and many compliments and kind inquiries were exchanged. His wife, however, though expressing her willingness to do anything she could, to mend things, or to set the cave to rights, or cook a little something when the dragon had been poring over sonnets and forgotten his meals, as male things will do, could not be brought to recognize him formally. The fact that he was a dragon and they didn't know who he was seemed to count for everything with her. She made no objection, however, to her little son spending his evenings with the dragon quietly, so long as he was home by 9 o'clock, and many a pleasant night they had, sitting on the sward, while the dragon told stories of old, old times, when dragons were quite plentiful, and the world was a livelier place than it is now, and life was full of thrills and jumps and surprises. What the boy had feared, however, soon came to pass. The most modest and retiring dragon in the world, if he's as big as 4 cart horses and covered with blue scales, cannot keep altogether out of the public view. And so, in the village tavern of nights, the fact that a real live dragon sat brooding in the cave on the downs was naturally a subject for talk. Though the villagers were extremely frightened, they were rather proud as well. It was a distinction to have a dragon of your own, and it was felt to be a feather in the cap of the village. Still, all were agreed that this sort of thing couldn't be allowed to go on. The dreadful beast must be exterminated. The countryside must be freed from this pest, this terror, this destroying scourge. The fact that not even a hen roost was the worse for the dragon's arrival wasn't allowed to have anything to do with it. He was a dragon, and he couldn't deny it, and if he didn't choose to behave as such, that was his own lookout. But in spite of much valiant talk, no hero was found willing to take sword and spear and free the suffering village and win deathless fame, and each night's heated discussion always ended in nothing. Meanwhile, the dragon, a happy bohemian, lolled on the turf, enjoyed the sunsets, told antediluvian anecdotes to the boy, and polished his old verses while meditating on fresh ones. End of part 1.